Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Jack's Corner. I'm your host, Tarzan Bonanno, and with me, as always, is our founder, Jack Figgle. Today is the Papal Audience number 4. We're jumping all the way back again to 2005, the year Pope Benedict XVI was elected Pope. You were telling me a little bit about it beforehand. Sounds like you had a fun time and a bunch of people with you, in a way.
Hello, Tarzan. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to him forever.
And a hello to everybody listening in today. Yes, it was a follow-up from our 2004 visit with St. John Paul when we said farewell to him just before he passed away. And then about 6 months or so after Pope Benedict was elected, I think it was elected in the spring of 2005, we requested to have an audience with Pope Benedict through the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity. That was the office that we dealt with for these meetings with the Pope. And on behalf of Archbishop Vsevolod of blessed memory, who was our co-patron at the time, we requested an audience to brief him on who the Oriental and Lumen conferences were and what we did, and just basically, introduce him to our mission as a grassroots ecumenical group. So we picked a week so that we could visit Rome, and then from Rome go on to Constantinople and be in Constantinople for the Feast of St. Andrew on November 30th. So it was scheduled to be the end of November. And in order to avoid too much travel interruption, we scheduled to depart from Washington as a group on Thanksgiving of that year, Thanksgiving Day. None of us who were going had big family ties, and so traveling on Thanksgiving Day, I thought would be a good idea because hardly anybody else was traveling, and we would have plenty of open space on the plane going from Washington to Rome on Thanksgiving.
Except for all the last-minute travelers not going to the Vatican, but still there, going to Rome.
Right. So we wrote to the Pontifical Council, some months before to try to get a date arranged. And then along with that, I arranged for meetings with other high-level officials that the Archbishop could come and greet. And that was sort of the thing we did, was set up about 5 or 6 audiences with the cardinals and patriarchs that were there in Rome. And we allocated Saturday morning, I believe it was, after Thanksgiving, to be the day for us to go visit with Pope Benedict. And as we had done in previous visits, requested to have a liturgy time slot. And this time we requested to use what's called the wedding chapel in St. Peter's Basilica, which has an altar and a big, large area for doing local weddings. The altar has within it the relics of St. John Chrysostom. And so it was a very, very special kind of place for us Easterners to go and have a divine liturgy. And again, we were breaking some norms and some records by having an Orthodox Archbishop and an Orthodox divine liturgy at the tomb of St. John Chrysostom inside of St. Peter's Basilica. I don't think it was ever done before that or has ever been done since.
Okay.
So that was the plan. The problem that we had was that the Pontifical Council office that I was dealing with, and there was a Monsignor Johann Boni, who was our contact point, who was responsible for relations between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. So he was involved in all the things between Constantinople and Rome and all the Orthodox dialogue with the Catholics. He was our our point person and was helping us arrange everything, he wrote back to us on a couple of times in email exchanges that the Holy See had not yet confirmed an audience with Pope Benedict. So we planned all of our other meetings and still kept the time slot open on Saturday morning for us to go visit with the Pope in the hopes that it would, be approved. And the word that we kept getting back was that Pope Benedict, being a theologian, was not quite the same welcoming, open, friendly sort of Pope that John Paul had been. John Paul would give an audience to almost anybody, and Benedict was much more frugal with his time.
How many of the people traveling with you knew that you might not meet Pope Benedict? Did you tell them, or did you just let's hold off and see?
Oh, no, yeah. Well, there was only 3 others who went with me. And I did keep them abreast that we were going to Rome. We had these other meetings scheduled, and we did not yet have approval for an audience with the Pope. So, but they were prepared for that. So yeah, no, I was not holding back anything. I kept them informed because one was the Archbishop himself. And of course I had to make sure I kept him abreast. The second person that was going with us was Bishop John Michael Botín, our other co-patron. And, we were going to brief the Pope about what Orientale Lumen was. So our 2 co-patrons were going with me. And then the third person, as part of our 4-person entourage, was Monsignor George Dobes, who was a Roman Catholic retired Navy chaplain, close friend of mine here in Northern Virginia. And he was just sort of along for the ride. He was a strong supporter of Orientale Lumen and participant and a close advisor, and he counseled me on a lot of things. And because of his position with the Navy, he was very, very good at protocol. So he advised me of how to write and to whom to write and how to deal with, extremely high levels of the Catholic Church to get things accomplished. And so he was a very valuable asset as part of our entourage to brief actually everyone that we met, to tell them what we did and who we were, and to introduce Archbishop Vsevolod to all those folks. So as the dates came closer, we finalized the times and days that we would meet with the different officials and what our whole itinerary was going to be in Rome. And then from Rome, we flew directly to Istanbul, and we had an audience scheduled with Patriarch Bartholomew, and then we would be there for the Feast of St. Andrew on November the 30th. So that was our whole program, leaving on Thanksgiving, spending 3 or 4 days in Rome, going to Constantinople, visiting churches, seeing the Patriarch. We also went out to Halki, the island where there's a monastery and the former seminary that we've been to in the past. And so we all went out to visit that. So it was a full 10-day, almost 2-week trip. The morning we were scheduled to leave, which was Thanksgiving morning, Archbishop Vsevolod flew in from his home in New York. Or no, I'm sorry, he was leaving in Chicago at the time. So he flew in from Chicago to Washington the night before on Wednesday night. He stayed here at my home. And then the next morning, we were all getting packed up for the evening flight nonstop to Rome that was leaving in the afternoon of Thanksgiving. And about an hour before we were scheduled to leave home, I got the email from Monsignor Bonney that said our audience with Pope Benedict had been approved for Saturday morning, 2 days later. So we knew on the flight going over that we had the audience.
Okay.
And it came in with 2 days notice just at the last minute.
Almost the 11th hour.
Yeah,
almost
exactly.
The 11th hour.
The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Yeah, it was very dramatic. So we were just thrilled on the plane going over. And at that time, I had enough frequent flyer points that I was able to get all four of us upgraded into business class. So we had a very comfortable, enjoyable flight to Rome. Probably one of the most comfortable and enjoyable flights that I ever had in my various trips to Rome, because I knew that we had accomplished our goal, and that was to get in to see Pope Benedict. And the Pontifical Council's office kept telling us, this Pope is a theologian. He studies, he reads, he prays. He just does not have much time in his schedule to meet with people. Cardinals of the church cannot get in to see this Pope compared to John Paul, who would meet with anybody. And so when we were approved, the Pontifical Council office, Monsignor Boni, told me that they were even surprised that it was approved.
So basically, a full-on miracle.
Exactly.
It was a full-on miracle. It needs to be investigated by the church now that he's passed on. That's a miracle in his name.
Well, perhaps the miracle was caused by St. John Paul, that he, sort of influenced Pope Benedict. Said, he called him up the night before and said, "Hey, Ben, you got to meet with these people."
Hey, Ben. Okay. It's great.
So it was a wonderful flight over, and we arrived in Rome. A car that I arranged met us at the airport with all our luggage, and we drove into the city. We stayed at my favorite hotel, Hotel Santa Ana, on the Borgo Pio, which is the street that goes into the Santa Ana Gate. And so we were about 2 blocks away from the Vatican, from St. Peter's. So everything that we needed to go to was essentially walking distance. I think we took a cab to one of the first places we went on our arrival, and that was the Ukrainian seminary, monastery, and basilica that they have in Rome. That's away from the Vatican itself. There's a Ukrainian Catholic bishop in residence, and they have a fairly large, I think it's a Studite monastery and a seminary. And that was one of our visits. And at the time, the bishop was Bishop Liblochina, who was born in America, grew up in Ohio, and attended a Ruthenian church as a boy growing up. The place was a little town called Mingo Junction in Ohio. I think it's along the Ohio River, and there was no Ukrainian Catholic church for his family, and so he and his brother, Father Taras, who's now a priest, attended a Ruthenian church and grew up there. But when they went to seminary, they of course then returned to their Ukrainian roots, and Bishop Lib was consecrated bishop. He was the bishop in residence. I met him a few times, and being from Mingo Junction and knowing the Ruthenian church, he and I became very good friends. So we had dinner with him one night, and we went and had liturgy with him at the Ukrainian Basilica. Bishop John Michael and Monsignor George concelebrated with them, and Archbishop Vsevolod was invited to sit behind the iconostas within the holy place, which was a very special honor. And then I cantored the liturgy because it was just for us. And someone else, I think, went around taking pictures. So I have quite a few pictures of that liturgy. Monsignor Boni also arranged for us to have a meeting with Cardinal Casper, the head of the Pontifical Council, in his residence rather than in the office. So it was a much more informal, friendly sort of meeting. And we exchanged gifts, and we talked in English because the Cardinal knew English and everyone else knew English. And so we had a very, very pleasant visit with Cardinal Casper. We also went and paid a courtesy visit on Patriarch Daoud, who was, I believe, Syrian Catholic, and at that time was head of the Congregation for Eastern Catholic Churches. And again, it was a courtesy call. We met with him in his office with Monsignor Bonney. Monsignor Bonney was really our escort to a lot of these meetings. And we sort of went all around Rome with him to meet with those folks. And so it was a couple of days of meetings and prayer services. We also went and paid a courtesy visit at his residence of Cardinal Cachavian, who was the papal nuncio a few years before in Washington, that we would visit. When Archbishop Всеволод came to town, he would always say, Jack, schedule a meeting for me to go visit with my friend, Cardinal Cachavian. His nickname was Koch. He said, go schedule, because we'd been there several times, and at that time he was Archbishop, would welcome us with open arms. He and Archbishop Всеволод got along very, very well, and the Archbishop got along with everybody. He was so friendly, so we saw Cachavian in his residence as well, and then Monsignor George had good friends with the Paulist fathers who had a residence in Rome, and they invited us to their residence for dinner one night. And so that was, again, part of our itinerary. So we had lots and lots of different meetings over the course of 3 or 4 days. The Saturday morning, we had the liturgy at the wedding chapel at the tomb of St. John Chrysostom, which was very special for the Archbishop. And then that afternoon, or later that morning, was the scheduled audience with Pope Benedict. Slightly different than John Paul, we were there ahead of time. As usual, the Archbishop always liked to be at an appointment early, and it was a good thing because the group that ran the Pope's schedule were very efficient, and we actually went in to see the Pope 10 minutes ahead of time. So it was a good thing we were there early, that we were there and prepared to go in and see the Pope. I guess you could say they ran the place with German efficiency. So as in previous audiences, we were escorted in one by one by order of protocol, which meant since I was the layperson, I went first. And I had a gift for Pope Benedict, which was a white leather edition of the book I just published earlier that year of the collected writings of Archbishop Всеволод, who was, he was the leader of our entourage. His collected writings called We Are All Brothers, and it was volume 2, and that I had specially prepared into white leather. And so I came in after Monsignor Bonney presented the Pope with the book. And again, a little different from how John Paul received gifts. The Pope actually opened the book up, and the theologian in him was curious, and he actually started reading the table of contents.
Yeah, he was just like, ooh, a book. Yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Let me just read this. The guy's right there. Like, you could just...
Yep, exactly. He was curious to see what was in the book. And then I think he probably asked me a question or two, perhaps. I can't remember. I was, when you're in the presence of a Pope, it's kind of just an awe. It's hard to know what to say. You just sort of go with the flow and hope you don't, mess things up. And then after I greeted him and he was finished with the book, then Monsignor George came and greeted him, then Bishop John Michael, and then the fourth was Archbishop Всеволод. And when Archbishop Всеволod came, then we all stood for a group picture. And then the Pope and the Archbishop sat down at the table, the desk that was there in the audience room, and the three of us were escorted out into the anteroom so the two of them could have a private conversation, just like John Paul had done in previous years. All I know that took place, because there's pictures, taken by the Vatican photographer is that the Pope received from the Archbishop the Panagia or Engolpion of St. Peter and St. Andrew that we had made for the first Oriental Lumen Conference in Constantinople. We had an extra one. I had a few extras made, and so we had this one engraved and gave it to Pope Benedict as a gift. The Pope turned around and reciprocated by giving Archbishop Severall a pectoral cross of the synod that had just taken place in Western Europe. And so when the Pope gave the Archbishop the cross, the Archbishop asked if he would bestow it upon him. And so the Archbishop stood up, the Pope stood up, and the Pope put it around his neck, which is a significant sacramental, if you will. And then the pictures after their private chat show the Archbishop wearing both his Panagia and the pectoral cross together. So there's photographic evidence of what took place and what was exchanged between the two. And of course, as I had done with John Paul, I asked the Archbishop what they talked about, and he said to me in his deep baritone voice, "What goes on between the bishop and the Archbishop, between the Pope and the Archbishop, is between us alone." So I'm sure they exchanged pleasantries. This time, though, they may have spoken in German. I can't remember now, because the Archbishop was fluent in several languages. With the Pope, he spoke Polish because the Archbishop had been born in Poland and grew up with Polish parents and had learned both Ukrainian and Polish as a boy. Then he learned English when he grew up in Australia as an older boy and studied extensively, was very, very smart. And I think he knew German because he went in the previous couple of years, in the year 2000, for the Jubilee, and I think or maybe it was a few years after. Anyway, I remember him telling me that they were speaking German, and he was, speaking along. Oh, it was a visit that he was invited for the official June meeting of the Orthodox and Catholics on the Feast of Peter and Paul, and he was one of the entourage. And the leader was even though he was Greek Orthodox, he was German by background, and so they were speaking German with Pope Benedict, and so I think they probably spoke German when they were by themselves one-on-one. So they spent 10, 15 minutes talking about, I'm sure, the dialogue and relation between the churches. And it's, sometimes at those meetings when the most progress is made, at least in terms of building up friendships. And my old friend, Metropolitan Kallistos of blessed memory, always spoke about ecumenical friendships that he built up around the world with people. And that was one reason he enjoyed coming to Washington to our Oriental Lumen conferences. Was he said he had many ecumenical friends that he met in Washington. And so this was another occasion of two high-ranking church officials becoming ecumenical friends. After the audience, we went and had lunch. And then in the evening, because it was Saturday, Vespers was scheduled in St. Peter's, in which Pope Benedict presided. And it was Vespers for the next day, which was the first Sunday of Advent. And so he came in beautiful red and gold vestments and presided from a chair off to the side. We were seated amongst the VIPs, and because of the protocol of the Archbishop, he was seated side by side, but by himself, with all the cardinals who showed up. So you had a whole bunch of cardinals in various chairs, and then the Archbishop by himself, but he was at the same rank as the rest of the cardinals. And the rest of us, the entourage, we were given seats adjacent to the other archbishops and bishops who were present. And so I went in cassock to sort of show that I was sort of partial clergy. As a reader, I can sometimes switch back and forth. In certain circumstances, I'm a layman, and in other circumstances, I'm a clergy. So I put a cassock on for the occasion, and I looked like everybody else, and went in and took my seat up in the front row, and got a couple of pictures up close of the Vespers that evening in St. Peter's Basilica. The next day, I think we then went to liturgy, perhaps at the Ukrainian shrine, and then flew off to Istanbul. And 2 days later, we presented the same white leather edition of the book of the Archbishop to Patriarch Bartholomew. So I have two pictures, one of me presenting to Benedict and one of me presenting to Bartholomew, the same book, 3 days apart from each other, hanging on my wall here in the house. It was a very ecumenical trip. And then we spent a few days in Istanbul, seeing the sights and visiting with the Patriarch and others in Constantinople. So that was the one time that we met Pope Benedict in 2005 in November. It was a wonderful experience. I still have fond memories of it. And fortunately, I have lots of pictures from it as well that jog my memory as to what we did.
Yes, you do. When we were talking about which papal audience you wanted to bring up before we started, I could just splice that all into this episode and it wouldn't even be... You had a lot.
Yeah.
There was a whole second half of this. But yeah. And so that's it. You got nothing
Yep,
else?
that's it. Yep, that's my ending sentence. Yep.
That's your ending sentence. Okay. Well then just some we've got some announcements. One announcement. For those of you who love the Orientale Lumen podcast that we do, the lectures that are out on Thursdays, starting next week, well, I guess the end of this week, you're listening to this on Monday, when we're recording on Friday. Starting the end of this week, if you're a subscriber on Spotify, and by subscriber we mean there's a subscribe button that you pay $4.99. There will be extra content in which we will have a dialogue, myself and Ted Januszewski from the Irenaeus Center in Rochester, New York, talking about ecumenicalism. And we have 4 episodes ready, and they will start being released at the end of this week. So if you are interested in hearing that and interested in supporting the Orientale Lumen ministry, specifically the audio side, consider subscribing, and you'll get even more content. And then later down the line, we have about a decade worth of conferences that were all on cassettes and don't exist anywhere else, and they will be coming out shortly thereafter. With that being said, thank you all for coming to this episode of Jack's Corner, and we will see you again next week. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.